judge's relationship with each deputy clerk, with each bailiff, each attorney, with each litigant, and how that's approached matters.
Welcome to Tennessee Court Talk. This is a podcast produced by the Administrative Office of the Courts. I'm Samantha Fisher, the Communications Director for the AOC, and today we're delighted to have Chancellor J.B. Cox. He is the Chancellor for the 17th Judicial District, which includes Bedford, Lincoln, Marshall, and Moore counties. Thanks for joining us, Chancellor.
Glad to be here.
I've really enjoyed listening to your presentations that involve relationships in the courtroom and thinking and talking about all the different people that make a courtroom work efficiently and effectively. And I should mention, for those of you listening today, this is probably an episode best suited for other chancellors and judges. As we consider, all the people that make this work well and the importance of what goes on in many ways before and after a hearing, right?
Sure. I would encourage judges to listen to this if they get an opportunity. And I think there may be value for everybody, hopefully, in terms of what we try to communicate today. Frankly, it's a team concept, and I think it needs to be looked at that way. And I think that hopefully we'll be able to portray a picture that is both accurate and something that people can aspire to duplicate.
I've heard other judges say, everybody deserves their day in court. And do you want the impression to be left that you were, only a fair judge, or a fair judge and a kind judge? And starting with that, why don't we talk about the relationship between a judge and his or her bailiffs?
Certainly.
Tell me about that.
Be glad to. I think across the state, judges might have different perspectives on this, so I'll just add mine in terms of where it is for me. At least in the 17th Judicial District, I have a set of people that are basically charged to take care of me while I'm in court, and other judges, obviously, that are there, but each and every day when I'm there. And so I have 4 counties, so it's not going to be the same all the time. I don't have a bailiff that goes with me that I can have a conversation with, and it's the same every single day. So that's important. And sometimes if you're in a single county, you're going to have a bailiff that you can have a relationship with every day, and that's also important. But the bottom line there is, in my view, it's relationship. Knowing and understanding what each other's expectations are and handling that in a way that is not only fair and impartial, but that builds each other up. And I think that's incredibly important. My view on that is that all work is to be valued and should be valued. And I really appreciate what bailiffs and court security personnel do to keep me safe each and every day. It's an integral part on being able to deliver a safe, productive product where adversaries can come in and have their disputes taken care of, but yet that be done in an orderly and appropriate fashion. And so that relationship is important to making sure that comes off without a hitch and smoothly each and every day. And for me, differently in each place.
You're trusting a bailiff with your life.
Oh, no question.
And there's more and more news stories, coverage of moments when security doesn't go the way that it should.
That's absolutely true. You can think about that in terms of each courthouse has a security group that is responsible for making sure that the room is safe before court gets started, and it remains that way during the time that proceedings are ongoing. And that requires someone who is not only adept at it, but perceptive of those things that might go on that could cause problems, and able potentially to de-escalate things to keep them from becoming larger problems. That's hugely important part to making sure that we do things the way that we should. You don't have to look very far. Everybody's familiar with the judge in Nevada that got attacked, and that video has been a viral video. But what you don't see in that circumstance at first blush, and that you do see when you're focused on this relationship, is that her bailiff was the very first person to try to come to her aid and try to keep that person from getting her. That's very important. Their job in that circumstance is not only to keep order, but to make sure that the judge is protected. And part of what we can do as judges to make sure those type of things go off without a hitch is to make sure that we have those kind of conversations with our bailiffs.
The talk.
Yeah, and by that I mean, okay, if something happens, bailiff, what do you expect me to do? This is what I think I should do. Let's talk about it. Let's, have a practice session about it, whatever we might need to do to make sure that we have a complete understanding with each other as to what's going to happen. If somebody pulls a gun, what am I supposed to do? If somebody jumps the bench, what am I supposed to do? What's going to make your job easier?
You had an interesting example about that, because if there is a security incident in the courtroom, in order to help the bailiff do his or her job well, sometimes you need to leave the courtroom.
That's correct. But sometimes the presence of the court is an escalation, and it has an effect of dividing a bailiff's attention. So in that aspect, it's a matter of, okay, if I do what the security plan tells me to do, I duck behind the bench and I leave the courtroom, then that's one less thing that the bailiff has to worry about and keep in order in the rest of the room. Knowing the bailiff's tendencies and the bailiff knowing my tendencies are really important in that aspect. And I think that is built on relationships. And I want to be able to have a good, solid relationship with every bailiff that is charged with taking care of me wherever I might be. It's an important aspect of making sure we do the job right.
You have some best practices for this specific relationship. You've talked about communication of expectations, also simple gratitude.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think the perception of judges in that circumstance is that people think a judge is talking down to them, or people perceive that a judge is being condescending, and I think that's the worst thing that you can project in that circumstance. Frankly, I hope I have conversations with my bailiffs that have to do with their kids and their hobbies and what they do and what they're about beyond the courtroom, so that it increases what we do together and we can work better together when we're talking about those things that are in the courtroom.
Let's talk about clerks for a moment, because this is a relationship that you have said is evolving in some cases, or is changing a bit because of the elected nature of that office.
I think that's true. Tennessee still has two, what I would call classifications, which is probably too simple a word, of clerks. They're elected circuit clerks, and then there are generally appointed clerks and master across the state. So an elected clerk is elected by the people for a certain period, usually 4-year term in that circumstance, and a clerk and master is appointed either by the chancellor, who is seated specifically, or by a committee of judges serving as a chancellor for a 6-year term. So the accountability of those two offices are different because of how they actually exist and what the expectations are differently in those places. With circuit clerks, I think it's an obligation and an opportunity for a judge to be able to deepen a relationship with a person who's actually elected by the voters, and be able to have an understanding of communicated expectations and a synergy with them without being offensive in that circumstance, which is built on having a good relationship.
And the relationship produces a courtroom that is run really well.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
That's the everything with judges is a balance. So if your relationship is too strong, you might be the bailiff who is texting 500 times with the court that ultimately resigns because of that. So you can't let it go too far. But going back to simple gratitude, look, I know that you're taking care of me today. You put your life on the line, whether we had something happen or we didn't have something happen. I'm interested in you as a person. I want to know that you're okay. I want to be your friend. I hope you want to be my friend. I know that sounds simple, but it's true. And in that aspect, as we know each other better, we'll be able to work together better.
We've heard clerks say that some things that are really important to them with the relationship with their judge is to speak up, to be noticed, even to have attorneys and other parties speak up in the courtroom so that they can do their job well.
I think clear communication always brings forth better efficiencies, a greater product from that perspective. So, for example, if your clerk is taking exhibits in a case and is charged with that, and you're the court and you mumble something that they need to write down to put onto the exhibit sticker, and then we get off count, we have a problem later. That's an issue. If they know of a situation that they need to apprise you of, you need to be able not only to speak up, but to listen, and to listen well. Oftentimes the clerk wants to be seamless, They want to be able to do what needs to be done without drawing attention to themselves, especially in the courtroom, and the judge becomes used to that. So we really ought to be more attuned. If a clerk is asking me a question, asking me, look, I need to talk to you about something, that's probably a time that we need to make sure that we take care of understanding what's causing that clerk to have a concern. So all of those things should lead to but me speaking up in that circumstance is to be done in an appropriate way to communicate what expectations are or rulings or whatever. So if it's a court reporter instead of a clerk, obviously I'm going to need to speak up to make sure that's down on the record completely. If what I'm talking about has to do with the duties of the clerk and I'm not clear in my communication of that, it's going to cause a problem between myself and the clerk or the clerk and master. And that happens inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom. I was talking to judges this morning. One of the questions that I asked them is, look, will your clerk come to you with questions? Mm-hmm. If they are not willing to come to you with questions because there's tension in your relationship, you're probably not in a good place with them. And it's something that you need to work on as a judge. It's fundamental for lawyers. We all talk about the fact you really need to be friends with the clerk, and you need to do that from the time you start the practice of law. It doesn't change just because you become a judge. Frankly, it becomes more important in that aspect. The other thing that's important to us as jurists is that the clerks are responsible for reporting the things that we actually do. When cases are filed, what type of cases are filed, how they're disposed of, the way, the classification of all of that. And generally, all of that's done by folks who are really conscientious about their job, who do it diligently with a desire to make sure that it's done accurately, professionally, and excellently. And that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. Keeping track of the volume of cases, the time it takes, all that's really important because those are metrics that are evaluated by the state.
That's true. We have a specific single metric in our weighted caseload, which is for a clerk. Since we're talking about clerks, the clerk's responsibility when a case is filed is to report that case as it's filed, and it's assigned a certain number of minutes for our caseload based on how it's filed. The clerk that's doing that reporting, it's that clerk holds that judge's life in their hands in a way that's not the same as if it's a gun or if it's an attack, but it relates to what that judge is actually doing. So it could be reflected that judge's work is not nearly as complete as it would be if those things were reported correctly. So all of it's important, and we all need to be able to communicate about it together and reach the right result.
And I just bet that these are, I guess you might define them as soft skills that may or may not be addressed or talked about in law school, for instance. These seem to be things you learn on the job.
They're absolutely not talked about in law school in that aspect. I agree with that. You might get an anecdote or two, but that's not what you're learning or how you learn to think then. This is more about being a good person and treating others as you would like to be treated, and treating everyone with integrity and respect and honor, and doing that no matter where you're coming from.
Chancellor, you talked about being a judge. There's always a balance that you're trying to achieve. And I want to talk about one more very important group of people that you deal with, of course, the attorneys. And this idea of, do you want to be fair or perceived as fair? And, the legal community, I think sometimes we forget this. You all know each other. You know the lawyers. Some of them are in your courtroom frequently. And you don't want to, it's human nature perhaps to be slightly different around those who you already know or have a relationship with than those you don't.
I agree with that. And so the answer to your first question is I want to be both fair and perceived as fair. That is a difficult balance to reach, especially with people you may have had a relationship with before you came on the bench, people who have an expectation that that relationship continue in ways that may not be appropriate for that to continue as a judge. But yes, I want that. What's of tantamount importance is how people perceive it, but I have to be true to self as well. So I want to be a fair and impartial arbiter of the law, regardless of the attorneys or parties that are before me. That gets difficult sometimes when you have a lawyer on one side and a pro se litigant on the other side. There's a whole lot of situations where that might come up. And so for me, one of the hallmarks in being able to make sure that is done well is the ability to listen. As a judge, if you don't possess that and patience for that, I think you're going to be frustrated early. So one of the ways that I think that you could pursue that is being able to listen to those things that are before you well and completely, and let everybody have their day in court. Sometimes it makes you be there later. Sometimes it makes you listen to things that you already knew, but it's still true. And so I think that's important. But treating everybody the same is important. There are situations where I've grown up with lawyers that practiced before me, from long before we came to the law. I have to guard against the perception of that being something different. Oh, well, this person's getting home cooking because no. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's a very hard balance, but you have to reach it.
It can be subtle because you know things about that person, their family, their
right.
hobbies, things like that.
And I'm thankful in situations where I have those people that are also mature enough to understand it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen all the time. We have sort of a society that likes to win. And so it's a matter of, look, there are going to be times you're going to come in here and you're my friend and I'm going to have to rule against you. And that's the way that it's going to have to be. It's not personal. It relates to the case that's before me. And I think the lawyers that are at least in my court know and understand that. And I hope that's an ideal that we can pursue. And we have to guard ourselves against biases that we have. And I think that by and large, the judges that I know do that. They're very careful about that.
Our conversation, Chancellor, has brought to mind a quote that I like. It's by Maya Angelou, and I won't remember it exactly, but it goes something like this, that over time, you may forget what somebody says or what somebody does, but you'll never forget how they made you feel.
All right.
Any parting thoughts?
Yes. One of the things we did today was talk about one of my favorite jurists, J.C. McClellan. He was on the Court of Criminal Appeals from Memphis, and we showed a clip from his wife talking about his life. And what I always knew about J.C. and what always attracted me to him was the level of kindness that he had. He was one of the most kind individuals that you could ever meet. Didn't mean that he was soft. Didn't mean he didn't make the correct legal rulings, but he was kind. Mm-hmm. And he was kind to everyone. And that has always made an impression upon me as a jurist for the years that I've been doing it, but it's also made an impression upon me as a person. Mm-hmm. Every relationship matters. The judge's relationship with each deputy clerk, with each bailiff, with each attorney, with each litigant, and how that's approached matters. Building those relationships with kindness, care, concern, integrity, and honor, valuing everybody's place and everybody's contribution, should lead to a team that can produce good results for people that have access to the system. And it's my hope that it produces better and happier people, whatever their perspective, whether it be judges or clerks or bailiffs or litigants or lawyers. Sometimes that has to go with a grain of salt, that you're not always going to get your way. But if you're content that everybody is approaching it from the best practices perspective, hopefully it's something you can be proud of and that we can all live with.
Thank you, Chancellor J.B. Cox, for joining us. Really appreciate your perspective over the years. This is really important information, I think, for those in the legal profession. The law is obviously tantamount, but these relationships and how you treat people in the courtroom has a lasting impression.
I agree, and I think it relates to not only professionalism, but collegiality and life in general.
And an overall good impression of the judicial system, because as you said, you're not just an individual judge, you're representing everybody.
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Agreed. And thank you for listening to Tennessee Court Talk. You can find more information about the Tennessee judicial system at tncourts.gov.